Wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about the practical aspects of leadership and management. The idea being that people in supervisory and managerial roles have day-to-day tasks that they're responsible for. And a lot of times those tasks take so much of their attention that we tend to lose sight of the fact that we need to manage our operations and know what's going on within our teams. And so the idea is, the question really is, how do we know what's going on? If you simply look at the routine, say patrol operations, you do your daily briefing at the beginning of shift, and then the officers go out and they handle their calls. You as a supervisor may get called to certain calls or listening to the radio, you're paying attention to calls that may command your attention, respond to those, manage the scene, and then off to the next. And then you have your paperwork that you have to get through, scheduling issues, other documents that you have to process, and then one of the big ones is report review. Well, we also have a tendency to understaff the supervisory ranks. So the same concept applies in terms of hurry through the work, hurry through the stack. And a basic audit that we do every day, although we don't technically recognize it as an audit, is report review. So we have the stack of reports, we pull them out, we look through them, we make sure there's no technical errors on them, but then we read the narrative. And those that are paying attention are going to be looking at, well, what went into this decision making in this case? Did we use the right resources? Did we take enough time on it? Did we leave any stone unturned? Did we not follow up on leads? Is it done correctly? The other part of the legalities of it, did we have reasonable suspicion to detain somebody, probable cause to arrest, probable cause to search, any legal problems within this document? What happens, we do really a surface level analysis of that, look for any grammatical or structural errors or any kind of confusion, kick the report back if we need to, and then sign it off and off it goes. Remember, if we sign that report off, it's communicating to the person that turned it in that it's good to go. We approve of this. You're doing the right thing. And I've seen so often, especially at a lieutenant level, looking at the reports that were signed off by a sergeant, that should have been signed off. I have a lot of questions about this. Again, the vast majority of reports, not a problem, but there's some that I have some questions about this. So we review reports, but then we often don't think about, well, do we audit the calls that didn't end in a report? And largely, no. There is a surface level analysis when they turn in their daily logs, and they're looking for call types in terms of that's supposed to be a mandated report, maybe that's not. But what happens is the officers actually will change the call type, and then they're supposed to do a change call type report within the system, but that doesn't always happen. Or if it does happen, they kind of skim through it and just think it's okay, and maybe it's not. So the idea is that you're doing these preliminary audits, if you will. You're looking at their overall activity and any specific issues that may come up within that activity. But what we're not looking at is statistics. What are the statistical averages across not only your team, but across your organization? And say for Riverside County Sheriff, there's 10 different patrol stations, so each one's their own police department, or actually several police departments in some of those cases, because some stations contract with up to 3 different cities. And so the idea is that what are my averages across my particular department? Nobody's really pulling those stats. And so the idea is if you look at a standard distribution curve in statistics, the vast majority of any given phenomenon is going to be within the 1 or 2 standard deviations of falling in the middle. So what you're really looking for is the outliers. Who's underperforming, not really doing anything? How do I find the underperformers? And one of the call type audits I would do is who's pulling a whole bunch of area checks. Basically what an area check is, they're driving through the area and just kind of looking for criminal activity. Well, you do that on patrol without pulling a file number. So when I was doing analyses like this and pulling stats, I found that there were a lot of people that were, not a lot, some people that were pulling area check file numbers but not doing anything else. Well, congratulations, you're driving file number. Where's the proactivity? Nothing's happening here. So you're looking at your people that aren't necessarily performing. On the other end of the scale, where people aren't quite paying attention, is we always hear about the folks that they're making a ton of arrests, they're finding a whole bunch of drugs, and they're off the charts in terms of being a good cop. They're performing out here. Well, they're an outlier. And it may be that they have the right character, they're following proper procedure, they're following the law, they're honoring people's rights. That may be the case. And if that's the case, you might want to award those people. But before you do that, you might want to look at, okay, how did they get there? If I start to analyze and assess and I start pulling body cam footage, I look at the reports, I look at the evidence, and I start seeing maybe inconsistencies or complaints are coming in that civil rights are being violated, you might want to look at those stats and look at that footage and look at the reports and figure out, did the officer get here because they were doing the right thing or because they were, either crossing a line or getting really close to it? You have to assess that. And I've seen that in my career where there was one individual that was known to, or at least believed to have engaged in some shady behavior when it came to arrests. And he was going to be awarded some kind of a yearly award for productivity and number of arrests. And apparently somebody else told the lieutenant that you might want to look into this before you just start throwing awards at this guy because we think there might be something going on there. And fortunately, they looked into it and dealt with it. But the idea is that you need to figure out who's here. As far as the arrests go, okay, how many arrests? How frequent are those arrests? What kind of crime are people being arrested for? Things like that. One of the things you want to look for is, in terms of crime type, in California, we have the resisting, obstructing, and delaying a peace officer in the performance of their duties, 148A1 of the California Penal Code. If I do an audit and I find there's a particular officer that has a whole bunch of 148 arrests, I might want to start looking at that. Why is this person having a whole bunch of resisting? Are they creating those conditions? Are they pushing people's buttons? Are they getting in a lot of uses of force? Which again, now you want to look at the use of force stats as well. You want to pay attention to what's happening here. The other thing too, you got to look at ratios. So I have somebody that's making arrests, that's great. But, and then we have a tendency to, when we do the yearly evaluations, well, how many arrests did they get? Well, how many they got is mildly interesting. The substance, honoring rights, doing good investigations, proper investigations, collecting evidence, being fair, looking for truth, not just guilt. Well, how many of those cases were filed? What percentage of those cases were actually filed by the district attorney's office? And then from there, how many were convictions? If I'm looking at a lot of arrests and then a significant number that's not being filed, might want to look at the ratios there and determine, and look at the reports themselves and determine, are these good arrests? And because if they're not good arrests, you can get sued. There's all kinds of problems that can come with that. So look for that. And again, the conviction rates. And then looking at the convictions, were they convicted for what they were arrested for, or were they pled down to something way lower than the crime was, which would also speak to maybe quality of the investigation. That speaks to that, but then the filing may speak to the DA doesn't trust that officer. It's like, we've had some dealings in the past, and we don't trust that you'd be good on the stand, or we just know your quality of work and it's just not there. So you have to look at those things. Mentioned uses of force, how often, and I want to clarify this. If you have officers working in a very dangerous area, a lot of violent crime, a lot of gang activity, a lot of parolees, probationers, dangerous people, then I would expect that you might have a little bit higher numbers of uses of force in those particular areas, though it's not saying that you should, it's just you shouldn't be surprised if you do see it. You still want to analyze it, assess it, but you might have some higher numbers. Don't automatically assume that you have some bad officers. It could be where they're working. Obviously, any kind of pursuit your officers get in, it's a danger to the public. Many organizations have an automatic review process. And then we'll get to domestic violence. You need to be auditing those cases, because here's any other case where somebody believes that you didn't do a proper investigation, you didn't put forth adequate effort, those parties will complain. Domestic violence victims can't. If they complain and you respond to it, then their abuser is automatically going to abuse them again. So you have to find a voice for those that don't have one and analyze whether we're doing the right thing on this or not. The other thing too is, what do you people know? In the information realm, you have to pull the training records. You get into a new assignment, you have people that are reporting to you now, what do you know about them? Remember, knowledge, skills, and abilities are in the information realm. Of course, you're assessing values and resources, but in the information realm, what do my people know? And doing an analysis at the stations I've been to, I was always interested in how many DUI arrests we're making. Well, I found that on graveyard shift, where you should have the most number of alcohol-based DUI arrests, I found nobody was being arrested for DUI on graveyard shift at these particular stations. So then I went to the training records. Wow, okay, well, nobody really has this training. And on the flip side of that, I found that there were a couple of deputies that asked to go to the 3-day DUI investigations course. Awesome. But in the year after they took the course and being assigned a graveyard shift, they didn't make a single arrest for DUI after we sent them to a 24-hour course. That went into the evaluation. Look, you asked for the training, we sent you to the training, we spent the money on you. You're on graveyard, which is conducive to doing DUI arrests because there's not a whole lot of calls for service in many of your nights. Why aren't we seeing arrests? On the flip side of that is that if you're expecting people to make a certain type of arrest or handle certain investigations a certain way and they don't have the training, don't be the bad leader that goes, hey, we really need you to pick up the pace on this. We need you to make more arrests. You didn't even assess what they know. Find out what they know and what they don't know and fill in that gap. And then when they have the knowledge and they have the time, then you can expect them to perform. Very important to do that. Other thing too is that pay attention to what's being said in briefings. This is a substantial source of cultural development and how you sustain a culture. Whatever is allowed to be talked about, well, I shouldn't say allowed. The idea is if there's something questionable that's said in a briefing, you got a sergeant sitting in there and every once in a while a lieutenant will come in. But if somebody says something questionable, that would make you think that might be a violation of policy, that might be something that gets us in trouble, that might be a value that's improperly carried out or a wrong value. And I'll give you a case in point. So I'm a lieutenant at one of the stations, and fortunately I had a good relationship with the people at that station, and they trusted me. And it was very telling in terms of that trust was great, but I had a very good deputy, high on the character scale, but subject to the culture. And he was simply mimicking what he heard other people say. He was a canine handler, and so he goes into briefing and he says, hey, somebody get me a bite tonight. I'm like, hold on a sec. So we talked after briefing, I'm like, do you understand the implications of what you're saying? I know your heart, I know you're a good guy, I know that you don't, your intended message was not that you wanted to hurt somebody, because I know you. I mean, if I didn't know, I might have some serious questions about that. So, and I think I know what you were thinking, but what was your thought process with that? Well, you know, I mean, we send our dogs through training, we take them on calls. We want to have some confidence that the dog's going to perform like they're supposed to when we get out there. And so, when I say that, get me a bite, all it was if you have, translation is, if you have the circumstances that merit a bite and it ends up in that with a proper use of force and proper de-escalation, and if we happen to get in a situation where that could happen, I'd like to be there just in case. So if it does happen, I can assess whether my dog can do the job. I said, that's fine, but understand this. Let's say that you did get a bite that night. And any good civil attorney or defense attorney is going to go in there and say, okay, talk to me about what you talked about in briefing that night. And somebody from that briefing room, they're all going to get deposed. And, well, he said, get us a bite. How do you play that down in front of a civil jury? How do you play that down in a criminal jury? You're not. And the look on his face was very telling in terms of he had never thought of it that way. Again, the culture and the programming. He knew his heart that he didn't want to hurt anybody, but he didn't understand that there are implications way beyond what is coming out of your mouth. We know your intended message. Some people may not know it, but our little group here does, for the most part. Out here, you're not going to have that alignment. You're going to have people questioning what you meant. And based on the history of a lot of other organizations and other situations, even within that organization, where things went sideways, what confidence level do you think these people have that you meant well? So be very careful about what's going on in briefing. And not to say you're going to have a knee-jerk reaction, hey, don't talk like that, just talk it through. You have to send the message that you can talk about anything, that anything can be communicated. And here's the beauty of that conversation. The deputy thanked me because he said, you know what, I learned something from this. You didn't hassle me, you didn't point a finger in my face, you didn't make me feel stupid. You allowed me to come to my own conclusions by facilitating a conversation. And thank you. And he went away with, obviously, a very valuable tool with that. But very important to pay attention to what's being said there. So going back to your statistics, when you start to audit and you start to look at statistics across the board, what everybody's doing in terms of their patrol activity, how many calls for service they're handling, the percentage of those calls that they're actually writing into a report, because I've seen a range from deputies writing 4% of the reports to 20% of the reports. Well, some people are down here, some people over there. Well, what is the norm? What should we be writing? Well, we don't know. We don't know unless we do a deep analysis in terms of, okay, under these conditions, the report's written. We have very broad parameters that gives the officers a lot of discretion on what to write, what not to write. But do you think that people might abuse that? Yeah, your 4%ers are abusing that. Those are the people that are telling people that nothing I can do for you, and you can, if you have any problems, you can call back. Of course, when they call back, did they get the same deputy? No, they get somebody else who operates under the higher levels and percentages for writing reports, and that's what they're relying on. If you do not pull stats, if you do not look at the data, those people are going to hide, and you're never going to identify them. Now, the beat partners, they know what's going on, and they're relying on the chain of command to pick up on that and deal with it, because they're not going to dime off their fellow beat partners on something like that. Obviously, we have the duty to intervene on use of force cases and things like that, but when it comes to, hey, you're a LOP, I don't like it, that conflict usually stays at the line level. If, however, you're paying attention to the stats and you're talking to that 4% report writer, they're going to pick up on that, oh, thank you, you took care of that problem. At the same time, you're looking at the 20% report writer. Might you be writing too much? And so you might have the conversation in terms of what are your parameters? What makes you think that that report needed to be written? Because if you are writing more reports, either you're writing them on your own time or you're taking patrol time to do it. Let's balance that out. So you're looking at that scale. But again, you have to figure out through good research, scrutinizing and identifying best practices, science and math to get better established norms than your best guess. And then you can determine, okay, here's what we're doing, here's what the norm is, and can you have people fall within the norm, but the norm's not good. The norm doesn't serve the public interest. You will constantly find that in domestic violence cases, where what we do normally, the is of what we do, is not what we ought to do. We'll talk about that at another time. But again, the whole point of this, you have to do audits. You have to assess what your people are doing. And then when you find error, remember, go back to the framework, information, values, and resources. What are the problems in the information realm? Are my officers trained right? And did they go to training, number one? Number two, what was that training? Number three, was anything in that training wrong? And I think I mentioned before where 20 years domestic violence was taught incorrectly in our academy, in violation of best practices, law, and policy. So make sure you're vetting the information realm. The resource realm, okay, what do my cops have time to do? Sworn and non-sworn positions, what do they have time to do? What don't they have time to do? And start working around your actual numbers, and don't expect people to do something they don't have time to do. You have to work that. We'll talk about that later. And then the values, the whole character aspect of it. Again, understanding that when you have low knowledge and you have few resources, even the best people will come down and practice at lower levels of character. If you have any questions, let me know.